Okay, brilliant. I went to college here. I graduated in 2001, so it's an eternal return. I'm very grateful for it. Um, I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking through, I suppose, the Askeaton project, with an emphasis on the publication output that myself, my co-editors Michelle Horrigan and Niamh Moriarty have been involved in and around the last 10 years. Um, we started in 2006 in Askeaton. Askeaton's 1,134 people on the last census. It's about 25 minutes drive from Clare Street. It's beside the Shannon Estuary, medieval town. For some reason, all the castles, friaries, Knights Templars, towers, everything else there, it's all dated like 1199 and 1299. And my personal suspicion is they're putting it at 99 to get it into the previous century for the tourist industry. Um, it would have been the administrative capital of Limerick way before Limerick was. Today, it's home to several multinationals of various shapes and forms. There's a farming community there and a busy town centre that's always trying to rise itself up and have a strong community there. Um, so from 2006, we've ran a summer residency program where artists from Ireland, from elsewhere, come to Askeaton and they spend the month of June typically in the town. We don't have an exhibition space. We don't have a designated art centre, residency centre. All these activities occur around the everyday life of Askeaton. We have no particular interest, I suppose, in bricks and mortar. We always looked at the project as something that was experimental, open in many ways. Encounters could be had in so many different situations in terms of the cultural makeup, the social makeup, and in some cases, the economic structures of the town. From about 2012, that's moved into, I suppose, more expansive context-led projects that have been developed over a longer period of time. Askeaton has Ireland and the UK's most westerly Hellfire Club, for example. There's been lots of negotiations about how to preserve the Hellfire Club in Askeaton with local government bodies and the OPW here, and we found artists have a very important role in that. Think about Brian O'Doherty when he wrote in 1967 about the Hellfire Club in Dublin. He wanted to bring all the big land art boys over to Ireland and make land art on that site. So pieces of information that move around, I suppose, contemporary art legacies or traditions or the verbalization of what contemporary art can do and its potential. We're really interested in how that gets rooted into this particular context. And so we're almost 20 years into it. We're still not running out of ideas, which is surprising in one way, you know, but we've been very lucky to have a lot of people come into the town and radically change in our minds what that is. And that's a belief in networks, that's a belief in communality, conviviality as well. All the artists, we have lunch and dinner together. And if you give an artist their lunch and dinner, it's amazing the amount of stuff they will do in a day, right? You know, if you're watered and fed and you don't have to think about that and someone's plating it up for you, lots of things genuinely do happen. And so what we would see out of projects that would be presented in different areas of the town, we would do an open day, we do associated events around the artist's stay there. We would get to the end of the 2 weeks and see the incredible amount of research artists can get done in a period of time once they're watered and fed. And somehow we would notice a kind of disparity between all these information, all these kind of conversations and investigations, critiques, celebrations, and what we would do at an open day where people would have maybe 10 minutes to present to the public what they had done during the residency time. And out of that, in a very pragmatic sense, we're not very vocational around publication practice. Pragmatically, we realized we should start making printed matter and publications out of this that would kind of nourish the situation further, push on these ideas in many ways as much as we can. So we're about 20 publications into that process now. we have a very loose editorial. We're interested in how it's been led by encounter, a little bit how you were talking about how one situation leads to another book leads to another. Um, Floating knowledge is an idea I have. A lot of the situations we're trying to tie down editorially are sometimes rumors, sometimes things that are muttered under the breath in Irish society that maybe need to have more of a spotlight on them, or be elongated, or be more pronounced in terms of how we all live our lives and how we try to dwell authentically. Um, and we rarely would take a manuscript from somebody and edit it. We're in at the very, very start of someone coming to here, getting to know the terrain, and then somehow a publication hopefully blossoms out of those scenarios. What else can I say? Yeah, I mean, there's an interest in Ireland as a post-colonial structure in a lot of the books. Where we are in Askeaton, we're not quite post-extractivist in any way. 3 kilometers from our house, and we work off a kitchen table in the house. That's our base. We have a Russian-owned aluminium refinery, which the Irish government do not place any sanctions on. The main shareholder there, Oleg Deripaska, takes the money and moves it to the factory outside of Moscow, where he makes the military vehicles for the Ukraine. That's a very intense situation for a small town to be in. There's also serious environmental factors in terms of how the refinery works. And a lot of our programming in the last 3 or 4 years and continuing into the future is to look at how just transition process works in that, and also how the town begins to realize what social justice is around those things. So I'll touch on that a small little bit as we go on and give an example of a project where we managed to get it into the government buildings and have some changes in legislation through artist-led publishing. So everyone's super excited and Askeaton about that. All right, okay. I'll show some pictures though. The publication press is called ACA Public. This is the first book we did. It's an image of an artwork by the artist Susan McWilliams. We got to 10 years. We didn't want to do a retrospective or historicize a lot of the work that had occurred by the time we got to 2016. So we really thought about the state of play and how certain artworks were made over the last 10 years might be good to amplify or move into the publication realm. I suppose something about mediation here. This is a work by the Belgian artist Freek Wambach. It's called an Askeaton poem. The piece is based around Foley artists and the devices that Foley artists traditionally used in audio recordings to make certain sounds. And so what Freek did was deconstruct, I suppose, what would occur in a sound studio. On the left-hand side, you see small fire in Mag's hair salon, which is just a pile of cellophane foil in the quite incongruously placed in the shop front window. So if you want to make the sound of a fire, you get cellophane foil and you crumple it. And that's what will be in all the recordings that you hear. There's, of course, a process of mediation here for whoever owns the shop or who's running a business, because everybody thinks it's a bit of rubbish in the window. And so we're very interested, and it was a big thing for us to work with people who have businesses in town who are incredibly articulate about taking requests, talking to people, opening up their shop to the public, and then moving into this process that we're all very concerned around in terms of mediation of art objects, their latency and their potential. Freek made 12 of these around the town. You can see another one on the right-hand side. Deal discounts. Deal is the name of the river in Askeaton. So if you've got a Euro shop there, you put the 2 E's on it and jazz it up a wee bit. And in this case, it's a crash in Deal discounts, which is a whiskey bottle and chimes. That's how you make the sound of a crash for Foley artists. So it's quite typical, I suppose, Freek's installation. We will always look at what would be termed off-site spaces, I suppose, in the art world. But we're really interested in these situations when artists work in a context-led scenario and how that plays out and the surprises that occur around that. We have a legacy of 3 or 4 pieces around the town out of this heritage as well. And sometimes in the summer we'll resuscitate pieces that have been made years ago as well as part of our public programme. Shawnee Barron. Shawnee had his first exhibition when he was 65 years old in the tourist office in Askeaton, now 11 years ago. He's gone on to have shows in the Douglas High Gallery and Trinity College in Dublin, loads of different places around the world since. He normally makes walking sticks. He's done it since he was a kid. For farmers, first of all, for people to rally on cow herds. Here's Shawnee on the left-hand side in an image from 1972 of An Puck ar Buile, the wild goat. This is a tradition that would happen normally at Christmas time in many other parts of Ireland. In North Kerry and West Limerick, nobody can wait for Christmas. They do it as part of the Harvest Festival celebrations in September. So you can make him out. He's dressed as a goat there. That's him in underneath it. He won a prize that year. There was a drinking competition. The Guinness rep in Listowel challenged Shawnee and John B. Keane to a drinking competition live on stage. It was a draw. And of course, the tradition of the wren is very important here. The droline, the Irish term. The wren is the bird that's not as big as an eagle, not as big and powerful as the eagle of imperialism, but the wren knows how to fly higher. And there's great myths and stories in Irish traditions about the power of the wren, about the power of perception, and how you move above the hierarchies that keep you down. An example of Shawnee's work. A lot of the time the sticks, of course, grow upside, well, we turn them upside down. They grow in the ground where the root becomes the handle of the stick when Shawnee finds them. A lot of the time, the images that he doesn't carve into this stuff very much. He just looks at what he finds in the ground and then decides that it might have an illusion, might have a story attached to it. Here you can see a stick resembling a wasp. Check it out. It's a little dark to slide. I can assure you it's a giant wasp you're looking at there. And so we've done 3 publications with Shawnee. He again has become a very important part of our community in Askeaton, where he welcomes artists. He'll show them things in the countryside, around the town, narratives of the landscape that he's amassed over all his life, scouring around the bushes, the ditches and the bohereens of the area, looking for unusual looking sticks. That's what he does. Sometimes he'll find a stick, he's about to take it out of the ground and turn it into a walking stick, and then he goes, no, I'll let it grow for another few years, I'll see what becomes of that stick. So it's an encyclopedic knowledge of these areas, understandings that would be lost otherwise in many ways. You go out, take 10 minutes of a drive into the countryside here, it's all EU-funded agricultural land. You drive out towards Fines or Askeaton, the railroad is now reopening for animal feed to come in. Go out to North Kerry, they're putting a frack gas terminal out there. So there's this very intense process of industrialisation of Ireland, which is speeding up all the time now. And it's people like Shawnee that holds very particular types of indigenous knowledge that in some way are incredibly important for communities and other people who come to Askeaton to hold on to. So he's a hero, He's got loads of funny jokes. One of them is, there's 2 things that kill you in this world. There's the electric chair and there's the armchair. Then sometimes when he's trying to sell the sticks to tourists, he'll say, look, here's the story. You need 1 stick to go up the hill and you're going to have to buy a 2nd stick off me to come back down. So he'll tell you all this stuff. He should be talking up here, really, And he's got his Parisian gallery debut on September the 6th. So that's very exciting. He's a very well-dressed man. He's going to impress Paris no end. Catalina Lozano from Bogota, close confidant of the program for many years. She's now the chief curator of Artium, the main contemporary art museum in the Basque country. This is a publication Catalina did with us in 2016. Again, from the premise of coming and being on residence in Askeaton for a period of time with no prescribed pathway about what might happen, and having conversations here that then she began to cross-reference with other experiences she's had in Mexico, in Colombia, throughout Europe on her ramblings. She was, before she took the position in the Basque Country, still is a very active traveller, but was an independent curator, travelling around doing exhibitions in many different contexts. She wrote a good bit in the book about the Raquel Rovers, a criminal gang just out the road here who started breaking into museums in the UK in the mid-2000s. They'd steal rhino horns and then sell them on to the Middle East, or send them on to Asia, where they'd be ground down and put into cocktails, you know. And she traced a very particular genealogy around how museum collections here were then fortifying their collections against the possibility of the rhino horns being stolen. So the final indignity for the rhino was to be in the museum and have the rhino horn taken away into storage, even though they were stuffed and taxidermied already. And she began to see these kind of wave upon wave of slow violence upon objects, and the way this Western construct here in Ireland is made manifest. During 2020, this is Thomas Peake. His statue is still present in front of the Natural History Museum on Merrion Square in Dublin. There was a moment when the Shelburne Hotel in Dublin removed 2 statues from in front of its entranceway. There were bronze statues of Egyptian women. The hotel said it's clear that they were slaves because there's shackles around their ankles, and we've removed those statues to stand in solidarity with wider movements across the world at this moment. 2 days later, a fellow from the Courtauld wrote a letter into the Irish Times saying they were mail order statues. They're not shackles upon their ankles. They're jewelry. They were princesses in Egypt. And this all played out in the press here as a kind of fodder instead of interrogating the real bad lads around the place here. So I'll just read a little bit about Thomas Peake and his continued presence in Merrion Square in Dublin, and I'm going to quote Catalina, quoting her source material here. Yeah, okay. Eyesight's not so bad. Yeah, okay. Thomas Peake. During the expedition in the Congo, Thomas Hazel Peake bought a pygmy girl. They travelled together for over a year, and she nursed him through malaria. In the end, he was forced to leave her behind because her eyes could not adapt to sunlight after the darkness of the forest. So he's still got a statue in Dublin for himself. We're specifically interested in circulating these kinds of pieces of information. We understand our role as an artist-run space, that we can agitate particular things that maybe larger institutions are either uninterested, incapable, or have other things they want to do around situations like this, and believe in the latency of material like this, that situations need to build up, consensus needs to move ahead, and that's part of our understanding of how the press should be and could be. Deirdre O'Mahony, there's a publication we did with her 4 years ago. Deirdre has moved into quite a central position in terms of being a very important artist in contemporary art in Ireland. She's worked for 40 years around land-based issues. These are a series of paintings that she realised in the mid-1990s in the shadows of the Mullaghmore Visitor Centre controversy in County Clare, where the OPW, Office of Public Works, who take care of Ireland's national monuments, proposed to drill into the side of a mountain and put a big visitor centre on Mullaghmore. Divided up the community greatly there. Some people wanted jobs out of the visitor centre, but our folk couldn't understand why you were destroying the side of a hill. Went to the High Court, and eventually the building was not built. Deirdre's paintings, you might have seen one of them already in O'Mahony's bookstore down on O'Connell Street here, were made from ground down limestone from the site. She presented an exhibition of them in Carlow at the Visual Arts Centre a couple of months ago as well. And we kind of had, I suppose, we're always interested to being a little bit tongue-in-cheek in terms of the publication. And there's an exhibition here called Eva, which is Ireland's Biennale. When I was growing up, they used to have it every year. You know, everyone is so excited. They couldn't wait for 2 years on it. And they printed one of Deirdre's paintings upside down in a catalogue in 1997. So we had the opportunity here to correct the historical record in a very light way, so you can see it's the right way around there. There'd be fair amount of situations in Ireland where artists could end up having their work hung upside down. This is an image of a John Latham painting that was presented in 1967 as part of the Rosk exhibition. Rosk was held every 5 years. In 1967, every school kid in Ireland got the day off. Buses were put on and they were all brought up to Dublin to see Picasso paintings. And it's a very important memory for many people in Ireland, the first time they saw Picasso painted when they were a kid. Picasso had limited exposure in Ireland before that. He was in a group show in Dublin in 1915, another one in 1916, and his work wasn't shown here until 1967 again. The RTE crew could not understand what abstract art was, so they were just mucking around inside in the exhibition hall in the RDS. And what you see here is on-broadcast footage of that day, where they looked at the Latham painting and turned the camera 180 degrees to just in case it was actually upside down. John Carson. John grew up in Carrickfergus in the north of Ireland. Went to the Art College in Belfast in the 1970s. Couldn't understand why people in the Art College shied away from the complete mayhem going on in the war that was going on in Belfast at the time, and instead had a particular focus on formalism, on abstract art. Joseph Beuys visited there in 1974. There's very famous BBC Arena footage of Joseph Beuys talking in the Ulster Museum, and the camera pans from him into the crowd, and everybody's falling asleep, like in a really, really aggressive way. You know, like that, sprawled over the chairs, you know, drooling on the ground. And he was very taken by this moment, went to Cal Arts, involved with Michael Asher, John Baltazari, Barbara Kruger, Douglas Hubler, and came back and lived in London for 30 years, was a practicing artist there, the founding curator of Art Angel, and a performance artist in the city with an interest in the identity of the Irish diaspora in London. He lives in Pittsburgh now. So we spent a period of time working with John because he's one of our favorite artists and we feel so privileged to know him. He's living in Pittsburgh, so we went over, got so far in an archiving process in terms of us not having those kinds of skills or not knowing that. Eventually we're able to fundraise and get John's archive in good order. And over the last 10 years, we've had opportunity to run multiple exhibitions of it in different places over this time. And here's the book that we produced as part of it. John's most famous performance is called A Bottle of Stout in Every Bar in Buncrana. It was made in 1978. He wrote to the town clerk in Buncrana and said, can you send me a map of Buncrana and mark where all the pubs are on it? There was 22 bars in the town at the time. Richard Long, the land artist, was famous for making walks around the landscape. John decided instead of walking around the place, he was going to do a pub crawl. So he drank in 22 bars in one day, bottles of stout. Made a poster of it. It's him walking into the first bar. Then progressively photographs of all of the different pubs getting blurrier and blurrier during the day. And then he proceeded to write to Guinness in St. James's Gate in Dublin to look for sponsorship for the whole project. And there's an incredible selection of 20 letters between him and the marketing manager in St. James's Gate. You know, nowadays, corporate lads wouldn't reply to you, but back then they did, you know. And there's many other incredible things he's done. I'm just going to show one or two spreads from the book and to give you a sense of it. He ran the Art College magazine in Belfast at the time. This is some of the material they were dealing with. For example, the history of wheelbarrows. The Christians have expelled a nun, you know, trying to bring all communities from both sides together in Belfast at the time. Here's Joseph Buyse walking from the Giant's Causeway into the Art College to give a lecture as well. John and another friend of his, Philip, put up a sign on the way into the college saying, "Welcome, William de Kooning." And Buyse was mistaken for de Kooning in there. So full of jokes, you know, this guy. And this material, of course, is very important to understand the prevailing attitudes of the Art College at the time. It's brilliant. We were looking at like art and language, for example. Attended and gave a lecture there, Michael Baldwin, and some people afterwards thought it was Mike Baldwin from Coronation Street. So these kind of situations that, for you know, they're casual conversation, but in some way John has made his way around these situations in a very joyous way and open sense. And so I can't talk enough about John. He's one of my heroes. What has occurred, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years, where we have artists in Askeaton, we have a strong community of people who come. We have an open house every June and July. People come and go out of the town. Is that we've had opportunities to partner in other situations. We have a long-standing relationship with the Irish Architectural Archive on Merrion Square in Dublin. Here's an exhibition made by Adrian Duncan, the artist and writer, called Little Republics, where he began in Askeaton in 2010, talking to people who built their own once-off houses, bungalows in the middle of the countryside. This was incentivized here in the 1970s. You would go to the newsagents, you'd buy a book of plans of different types of bungalows. You sent off for the plans, you got them back, and you built the house yourself. And it's come to 30 or 40 years later where there has to be, I suppose, a cultural assertion whether this housing stock is of use now. It's all once-off housing in the countryside. How do people renew it again? And this has been a pursuit of Adrian's for quite a period of time. He published a book, and here's some images of the exhibition that we co-curated with the archive in Merrion Square. So every 3 years we work with an artist who will come in, work with the archive and the collection there. It's a great old thrill about it because something can go from being in an archive box to being in an exhibition just by moving it, you know? And there's a great generosity and friendship again in the building there with all the guys and folk who've been working there for the last 30 years. At the back of the archive, Adrian constructed the beginnings of a roof structure for a typical bungalow. You can see it down there in the bottom. This caused some concern in Merrion Square, which is the civil services spiritual capital of Ireland, that somebody had put in planning permission to build a bungalow in the middle of all this Georgian grandeur. So we had a good laugh defending that one, you know. we continue, I suppose, different ways of learning how the program can be made manifest in other locations. Sometimes it's as simple as organizing maybe a group show or a series of presentations in different parts of the world that showcases whatever is the key concerns that artists coming to Askeaton are looking at the moment. We don't thematically get involved, I suppose, in putting a clear narrative on that. Instead, there's a sense of divergent paths and situations moving from here to there and the openness of what that might become. We're working with Gustavo in the Tate Archive and Library in London and the artist Frank Wasser this year, who's been moving between London and Askeaton, considering there were potential relationships there. Some of you are going to Dublin tonight. Frank will make a performance there at 6:30 p.m. in the Hugh Lane Gallery. So it's always a bit of an experiment and really based on conversation and friendships that grow up over time, and really believe in that being the potential for getting art made and done and making a difference in the world. I just want to show one, I suppose, case study about one of the publications, please. This is a book called Men Who Eat Ring Forts. It was made in 2020. It's on its 4th reprint now, which is a rarity for our publication press. The image that you see in the center of it is a ring fort. You can see the ring fort there on the left-hand side. Ring forts are typically medieval enclosures that were built in the Irish landscape for both inhabitation and ritual. Archaeologists argue that there's either somewhere between 25,000 of them on the whole island or 60,000. You know, some of them might be buried. Many of them have been destroyed by infrastructure over the last 2 and 3 centuries. Here's a prime example of one here. On the left-hand side, you can see the ring fort in a photograph in the 1980s. You can see this railroad running up between Limerick and Galway, a disused railway line. And then by 2010, a more enhanced digital image where the motorway has ran right through the side of the ring fort and destroyed it. It's to see that, you can make that out in the slide. Great. The Irish state has a right to destroy any of its national monuments. They wrote an act in 1930 called the National Monuments Act. It's the sole discretion for the Minister of the Environment to destroy whatever he or she or they want. This is one of these laws that lies in wait, you know. In 1970s, they started digging to construct the new City Hall in Dublin at Wood Quay, and what was found underneath was the best preserved Viking settlement ever found in the world. There was a large campaign to save it there, but the state evoked the 1930s National Monuments Act, which is it can destroy whatever it wants for whatever reason it wants. And this is typically used today in infrastructural projects such as motorways, business parks, to steamroll over what has to be done on the straightest line from one place to another. And we have a good interest in this. You can see some of our explorations are about the landscape and the countrysides in Ireland. Ring forts are always also known as fairy forts. So they're the place where the fairies are. There'd be great superstition placed on that. What is an Irish fairy? Irish fairies are typically 5 foot high. They've got green blood. They're very aggressive characters. They don't have wings. They have 3 ways of traveling around the landscape. They go underground. The ring forts are typically associated as being the subway stations for that activities. They'll also go through the land, and then they'll also have a network of fairy bushes in different places to meet and strategize what you're going to do next. The other thing to say about ring forts is that they're very, very important places nowadays in terms of biodiversity, because as you can see, all the fields, golf courses, EU incentivized agricultural activity around them is not conducive to the native understandings or the indigenous ways of the landscape here. Here's Eddie Lenihan in a ring fort. Eddie used to have a TV program in the 1980s called 10-Minute Tales. It used to be on children's TV. And he collects stories throughout Ireland, has done it for 40 years. He'd say you can come along to some old fella down the bottom of the road and, you'll open the door and you go in with a tape recorder and, old people love telling stories. And this would go on for a day. It'd be a repertoire of stories they've told by the fireplace before. Eddie had come back the second day, turn on the tape recorder. They're still coming along, all these stories, an interesting beginning, something good in the middle, and a powerful ending. But you get to the third day, and then the stories that can't really be synthesized into traditional narrative form start coming out, catastrophes of the landscape. Eddie would have stuff on the Ballyseedy massacre in the 1920s when he met a woman in her 90s who had to take all the bodies and put them into an ass and cart and move them down the road, So situations that are so much about the land, so much about how people are in the land, the violence of the land in many cases, that can't be put into a twee story for tourists in any shape or form. Eddie campaigned in 1999 to save a ferry bush from the construction of the M18 motorway between Limerick and Galway. You can see the bush highlighted there by the big red circle that's typically used in ordnance survey maps to denote archaeological monuments. Eddie said that this ferry bush was very important because it was where the ferries of Munster, you're in Munster now, would convene before they would go into battle with the ferries of Connacht. And if you knocked the ferry bush, which has no historical listing in any shape or form, the ferries would be super angry and they would take all their anger out on the motorists on the road who are driving 120 kilometers by it. Most people here dismissed the story. He kept going. He got it on CNN. He got the pot-bellied Irish reporter from the New York Times to come down to the bush as well. He took a good look at it and wrote it up. And as you very well know, in our post-colonial context, Irish people do stuff when people from other places tell them to do it, right? And he got the road moved around the bush. So you can see the curve moving along there that otherwise wouldn't be existent. So I've worked with Eddie for 20 years. To put it in context, this is late 1990s. You have Swampy at Manchester Airport at the extension of the runway, digging holes and going down there. You have the Glen of the Downs in Wicklow, and you have Eddie here. And I think he's been the precursor to a lot of understandings of the landscape that are about the robustness of history, the understandings of how we dwell authentically here. And he's a great fella if you ever get the chance to see him in a concert or performing some of the stories or have a chat with him. So we published this book that was involving Eddie, Sinead Mercier, an emerging academic who looks a lot at environmental law, interrogated a lot of the situations around the National Monuments Act, how it's been abused from positions of power to get infrastructure built here that had very little resilience with landscape. All of that came together, and we're lucky enough now. This is the Oireachtas, this is Angus Osnodic bringing the book in. They're going to revise the heritage laws, and we have a miscellaneous category now, and that will deal with the fairy bushes. So somehow things are coming closer together, and situations that are beside each other, which were always about a boundary line, always about dividing things up for the sake of alienation, might come closer together in a shared world that we need. And so that might be a useful thing to be moving on with. So That's some of the development now. Thank you.